Thanks, Carl. Thanks so much for coming. I think last week we had about 30 sign-ups, so something must have excited someone over the last week or so to get so many of you here, so thanks for coming along. I guess just to kick off and give you a bit of background about where I worked for 8 years to start. So RewardGateway is still a HR software, sells software to HR. It was based out of London. So we came into a market where we sold employee discount programs. So it's like a perks program. You probably hear of that you get in various different companies. And we led on to sell recognition and other things over the years. But we came into the marketplace with a very different technology, a different service model, and where programs were like pretty much zero cost, or say like $1 per employee per year, we came in and we were selling something for a minimum of like $10 per employee per year. So it's a big difference. So we definitely disrupted that whole space and went from being the underdog to a dominant player really in the space of about 2.5, 3 years in the UK. We then expanded to Australia and to the US, hence why I'm living here. I moved here in 2013 and I loved it so much that I've stayed here. So I've got a green card now, so you're stuck with me. No, so that's a bit of background really. Today we're going to talk really about, when me and Mark were discussing this, a lot of the things that I did wrong. At the time you beat yourself up about them. It's even harder to drag them up like 5 years later and talk about them again, but hopefully some of them are beneficial. We'll also talk about some of the things that I feel that catapulted us and took us really far forward as well. So we'll share some of that insight. So just a little bit in terms of our kind of growth and stuff like that. I started in the business in the summer of 2008 and pretty much in a space of about 2.5 years, and this is just in new business. We took the sales team to delivering about $3.5 million of annual recurring revenue each year consistently. So it's quite a big jump. There was a lot of things we did right, a lot of things we did wrong. So that was an amazing piece in the kind of early startup phase. I kind of think of my time at RewardGateway in kind of 3 phases. It was like 3 different businesses and 3 different jobs. There was a startup phase, there was then like building out the UK and kicking off Australia, and then there was coming to the US and building out that, which I guess why kept me so motivated and interested, because I was doing so many different things over the course of like the 8 years that we were there. But when I first started back then, I was 23 years old. I'd never worked in B2B, never worked in a tech company, nor had my boss and good friend who's the founder of RewardGateway. So it can be done. You don't have to know everything inside and out. You don't have to go and get a big degree in whatever. It's more about being smart and understanding and really showing how much you care. So it ended really well. In 7 years, we did 2 big management buyouts. The first one was in 2010. I'm going to talk about some of the hiccups and hurdles kind of either side of them. So in 2010 we sold to a kind of boutique private equity house in London. So not to bore you with the details because it is quite boring, financials, but basically a management buyout is they buy a big percentage of the business. Some of the founders with shares get money back and they create new equity and stuff like that. So we sold for about $42 million the first time, and then we went on another 5-year sprint. And most recently, the summer before last, we sold to a company here in Boston, which is why I'm here in Boston. So that was Great Hill Partners, and we sold for around $220 million, which is probably a few less pounds with Brexit and everything that's gone on today. So that tends to work in dollars that way. But yeah, it's about $220 million. So an amazing time and great success, and hopefully we can just share a few things about that today. So I'll start with some of the things that were really challenging about my job, and the hardest thing about actually doing this was I met my wife working in the business at RewardGateway. I actually hired her. She still works in the business today, and she actually does my old job, which is pretty strange. It's not a kind of normal thing that you probably hear every day. So one of the easiest parts was probably the first 2.5 years, because there was no rules. Right, so we built off the back of a credit card. And literally, it was just, we did what we want, and we went for it, right? As soon as in 2010 hit, we became, I guess, my boss, who I still refer to as my boss, even though he's not anymore, Glenn said we became a real business at that point. That's how he kind of always crystallises it. But when becoming with a real business becomes like a much more sturdier P&L, more rigid targets, you've got to pay a loan back to the bank, etc., etc. So the pressure just becomes very different. So the first thing we wanted to kind of discuss today, and I'm sure Mark will open up for questions and stuff like that, is really kind of preparing for scale. Like I think we probably sold 2 years, a year and a half earlier than any of us ever expected. We're quite open and honest about a company in terms of how we wanted to do that, when we wanted to do that. I'll talk about it later, but every employee, 5% of the equity was shared between the whole company, no matter what job you did, whether you were a cleaner cleaning the office or you're working on the help desk. Everyone had shares in the business, and that's probably what made RewardGateway a special place to work. But one of the things that was very difficult is in that first 2 years, I would probably describe myself as a player coach. Because the team is so small, we're probably sub 50 employees. So you're very, I think always generally in this business anyway, but we're very like operational, tactical, strategic, up and down all day, right? So you're doing these different things. So one of the biggest challenges I had was actually learning when to stop selling myself. Yeah, so I've been kind of like the VP of sales, closing a lot of the big deals and managing a team of 4 or 5 people the rest of the time. So definitely one of the biggest learning curves for me was actually taking that step back and actually like stop selling. I think looking back in hindsight, it definitely prohibited stuff like recruitment, how we coached and developed some of the team, maybe even how some of the team felt at certain points. I was delivering maybe like 50% of the quota. So, when you're in that growth phase and you get to a point where, where you're like a VP of sales or a co-founder or a founder, it's like, if you're a founder, it's like, when do you scale your business? I guess if you're a VP of sales, and you start in there from the beginning, when do you stop selling? Which is a big thing for me at that point. So, I guess the question leading on from this is, when is the right time to kind of do that? There probably necessarily isn't a particular point in time that I would say, all right, now's the time to stop selling or anything like that. I think what you've got to do is you've got to accept the fact that you might have to go backwards to go forwards. And I wasn't willing necessarily to do that. Yeah, we delivered massive numbers. We just got a new investor. I wasn't going to be the one who sits there in the board meeting and goes, all right, we did 200 grand less than we did this time last year. That was unthinkable to me at 25 years old. It wasn't something that I would even entertain the idea of necessarily doing. But I think that comes down to a trust thing. I was a lot younger, so actually trusting your team and your people around you to take a step back and let them make mistakes. We're always very good at RewardGateway in terms of letting people kind of fail first. That's an important part of the culture. But I just think maybe at that time I wasn't quite prepared to. I carried the number too much on my shoulders, I guess.
What was the average sales size and the average sales cycle time?
Yeah, so it took us a long time to work out our ideal customer profile. In fact, when we sold to our first investor, we told them that we could sell to anyone, which is totally untrue. But they managed to buy into it and pay $40 million for us. I think we very, very early on split the business into 2 teams, and that was partly a bit of luck because of the amount of inbound. So before HubSpot coined inbound marketing, yeah, we were doing it by default, by accident. So we were doing white papers, wraparound on magazines, sort of old school kind of content marketing as well, before like blogging and stuff like that. So we would get about 50 inbound leads a month. So if you're in the UK, tiny little place, yeah, that's a lot of leads. So what we did with them was we funneled them into an SMB team, and then we had a corporate team. So our average deal value kind of went up over time. So it started around, in like the corporate enterprise team, started around 15, 20k, and it went up to 30, 40 over the time I was there. In SMB, it started at like 1.5k, and now, because my wife's still there running sales, it's about nearly 10. Yeah, so it's gone up massively. One of the things that always stressed us out definitely was our sales cycle. I think people get frustrated with how long it takes and the kind of speeding that up. But selling to HR is like pulling teeth. I did it for 8 years, and it's not HR's fault. They're just the kind of last to get their budget and the first to get it cut, right? People bang on about caring about their employees and employee engagement, but they don't often put their money where their mouth is. So it takes a long time and a lot of relationship building to do that. So even in a smaller business, they have to be in that buying zone, which is why inbound obviously is so important. But in SMB, I guess to answer your question, it's about 3 months. And in corporate, anywhere from 9, 12. I closed one deal that took me 4.5 years. Yeah, so in and out of closed opportunities, but as managing the account, about 4 years, that's the longest. But averagely, most of the enterprise stuff took a good year or so.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Cool. I can move on to another thing I messed up if you want. If there's no more questions. So I hired the wrong VP of sales, not once, but twice, which is really bad, really, considering you think you get it right the next time. You get a lot of input from other people in your business, and you think always that you're doing the right thing at the right time. I have a certain style and a certain way of managing sales teams. Some people are a lot more data and process driven. I think that's important to a certain extent. But I think how you lead and how you inspire people is more important to me. So, in terms of how you pump people up and what they're going to kind of do for you on a day-to-day basis. So there's kind of a different approach. And I think that the mistake that I made was trying to find someone who was the opposite to me. Yeah. Whereas actually, in hindsight, what I really needed was someone who was exactly like me. Yeah. Because it's easy if you bring in a VP of sales and they're the first person, and then they build their team around it. But when you're in a situation where you've got to bring in a new VP of sales, it's a very, very different kind of ball game. So that was one of the things. But looking also back on one of the things I did wrong is how many of you guys have a to-do list of some sort, right? Everyone, yeah. You tick it off. You have your 5, 10 things on. So when I was hiring for these roles, recruitment was on my list. It was in my top 5, but it was never number 1. Yeah, so I always put something there. So I'd be recruiting, I'd be working with my EA, and we'd be getting people in, we'd be working with recruitment agencies and stuff like that, but it was always 4 or 5. It was never number 1. It was actually, you need to own that process. The people that you'll bring in will define the way the company is and what you do. So that slowed down one of our sales team's growth by doing this. It could have been quicker and faster and bigger. I know we did well still in relative terms to the UK, but if I was looking back again, I would just make, when I'm recruiting, I'm starting a new company now, when that time's right, it will be my number 1 priority. Because if you don't make it your number 1 priority, you'll probably mess up. Yeah.
What were items 1 through 4?
At the time, it was probably something to do with, hitting the number in the beginning. Team, coaching, training was probably on there. You're really challenging my memory now. I'm thinking of that to-do list on my desk. And then, I'm not really, I probably can't even remember, but just general stuff that I want to be doing, maybe some sales process, something to do with working on one of the team, one-to-ones, something like that. They could have, I think sometimes what I've learned is doing studies lately of a wagon wheel of like a sales leader's time. The amount of time that people spend in one-to-ones and meetings is far too much. Yeah, and I think everyone can be guilty of that. When you get one of your first management roles, you think you need to spend your life in meetings and one-to-ones, and that's not necessarily the case. Depends on what your style is and how experienced your team is, but there's different ways of doing that. And I think sometimes you can spend too many times in meetings for the sake of meetings and stuff.
I'm curious from a strategy perspective, when you had the SMB and the corporate and you had smaller deal sizes that were faster on small business, when you had larger Did the company decide to pick one, or did you do both? Or if you did it again, now that you know, was there more margin in one than the other? Is, you know.
So, I mean, it's an interesting question. I mean, what was the decision point around S&B, larger corporate?
So, I don't know, you see it on people's titles all the time, so like sales in mid-market or stuff like this, and I can't claim to know how every other company operates, but one of the special things that we always did is even though we collaborated a lot, and we had one process, one best practice, one sales deck, all that sort of stuff, we treated them like their own mini businesses. And one of the things that our CEO always said is we had 2 chances to F up, or 2 chances to get it right, or a chance to do something differently. So that was something that worked really well for us. We learned, it was like learning with 2 different companies, right? So it was never one or the other. You know, in England there is a little bit, it's not as big as the US, so you have to be everything to everyone a little bit more because there's less people to sell to. So I think that's changing and stuff like that. But yeah, there was never one or the other. It was always how can we do either of the, you know, both of them the best.
Just a question. I mean, how long did it take you before you realized, yeah, I made a wrong choice here? This is the wrong person to be leading sales reps.
Well, when you do make mistakes, one of the things that we did was we rectified them quite quickly. Sometimes that can be painful, but it's a bit like a plaster weight, you want to rip it off quicker. No, in the first case, it was much shorter, about 2 or 3 months.
Okay.
And in the second case, it was a little bit longer, 6 or 9 months. But one point I wrote in my notes actually, you know, we were very stretched. We expanded into 3 countries with 1 leadership team. You know, private equity is very different to VC, so you know you've got to spend, you got to make $3 before you can spend 1. It's a different kind of way of working and stuff like that. So it wasn't unlimited resource. Just because we had a big profit margin and we were doing good sales numbers didn't mean that we had like endless resources. So I was spending once. That was kind of breaking point really. I was spending once a quarter in Australia. I was coming to New York once a month, and I was managing UK sales. And I didn't put that in as a point, but as we're talking about it, that was one of the things where I just thought I could do everything. Yeah, I just thought I could do it all. I thought I could set up the US, and I thought I could be helping Australia, and I thought I could be killing it in the UK still. But eventually something broke. So
It's kind of like the Superman syndrome. You can be everywhere at once, and
yeah,
you can't do everything,
possible.
obviously.
Yeah. There's not too many of these now.
What were the inflection points that you looked at where you said, like, now is the time we need to bring on a new VP sales?
I think the first time is just it's just like looking back and thinking, right, where do we want the business to be in 2 or 3 years' time? Looking at the numbers. In private equity, most of the investors are like they're accountants, right? And we had a great investor, really nice guy, but they just have this thing where they'll say, all right, you've got 5 salespeople delivering this number. If you put 5 in, surely we'll deliver double. It just doesn't work like that, right?
It's like the crazy math of P's. It's all based on spreadsheets.
Yeah, pretty much. So I think the point was just like, how do we move Tom up out of the business eventually? You know, up out of the business. But how do we move Tom and elevate his role so we can bring people in to manage some of these teams more on a day-to-day basis? We did that really successfully with the SMB team because I hired my wife. At the time, she wasn't my wife. Now she is. So. But yeah, we did that with one team, but we made a couple of mistakes with the corporate team. But yeah, we always had the plan to bring in middle management. But that's a whole nother story and another talk about, you know, leadership and management in the business, because that was a big challenge as well. So we'll move on. So commission structures. So we have various different commission structures at RewardGateway, and I put in one really shit one. And that was basically where the sales guys were dependent on, like they had to hit 100% of quota to get their money, right? Which is harsh, right? At the time, it was done with good intention as we expanded and stuff like that, but looking back, it was the worst thing we ever did commission-wise. It was really, really bad, and I changed it within about 2.5 weeks. But that's okay. These things happen.
But talk a little bit, what was kind of like the process? So you put this commission structure in place. Who complained first?
Well, my HR director at the time warned me not to do it. Right, this is the thing. When you're in board meetings, no one tells product how to do their job. No one tells marketing how to do their job, etc., etc. But everyone has an opinion on sales. So you have a different in that boardroom environment. Everyone thinks they know how to do your job, which is I guess in hindsight. Sometimes you take it, I'm always open to feedback and stuff like that, but at the time, maybe my eyes were shut to certain people or certain bits of feedback for certain, different reasons. But, good stuff kind of came out of that. We changed it very quickly. One thing that I learned about commission structure is it has to always benefit the salesperson first, but most importantly, it has to benefit the customer. Yeah, so if you like front end it and say, right, you sell this many widgets, this many whatever, and you get the most amount of money, that's necessarily not benefiting your client or your customer. So you have to design it in a way where the salesperson feels free to make the right decision for the business. And that's the most important thing. But also that they're handsomely rewarded for doing so. Because if they ever feel like they're not getting what they're valued for, then it just creates a negative environment in your organisation, which can be toxic.
So what do you do to actually start to incorporate more of the customer perspective into that number?
So we're talking about the two teams earlier, right? So SMB and corporate, or enterprise or whatever you want to call it. So the natural thing is if someone's selling SMB, they want to migrate to corporate, right? Because they get more money. Yeah, it's not necessarily the best thing for the business or the best thing for anyone else, because they might be really amazing at selling to people over the phone, or to smaller companies, or to CEOs, or whatever your business is, or however that ultimately kind of works like for you. But with SMB, say the average deal price was like 8 or 9k, and corporate is like 20, 30k. We made sure that a salesperson got paid the same commission. Yeah, so it cost us more on that SMB deal, to pay out. But the lifetime value we knew was high, 3, 4, 5 years. But we wanted that person to feel comfortable in their job, and just as important as someone selling to Amex or IBM or McDonald's, just because they sell to Farmer Joe down the road, an employee benefits program or whatever, that doesn't make a difference. It's just as important to us at RewardGateway. So, we did a bad commission structure, but we also did some amazingly good things that we learned from that. So I think it's horses for courses, depending on your business and what you're looking to achieve. But definitely have the customer in mind, and I wouldn't ever put any restrictions on the salesperson. So I don't believe in capped commission structures. Since then, I don't actually believe in really doing commission at a certain level. If someone really cares about your business and they're brought into it, there might be some sort of bonus or related pay, but I would strongly pay them salary, So I just believe it takes the stress out of the situation. I think there's got to be some incentive there, but I think you talk about someone being paid 60k or 60k, why not pay someone 100? Take it off the table. You're going to measure their performance in whichever way you do, so you know whether they're going to be good or not. You just people's home life, how they want to perform, just hitting that number of commissions. If you know they're a good salesperson, they're experienced, you don't necessarily have to always put a commission structure in. There's other ways to do things.
It's definitely controversial, right? Because the traditional method is 50-50, half base, half commissions, or some ratio there. Just out of curiosity, is everyone here is in sales? Are you doing? If you're doing like kind of like that commission-based structure, can you raise your hand? Anyone doing non-commission-based sales? Okay, there's like one hand. No, in a hand here. But what do folks think? I'm actually curious. Do you think that commissions drive performance, or is it worthwhile thinking of different types of structures for paying reps?
I found that the 50-50 commission plan, the management of the employees was reduced, whereas if you had a high base salary and someone wasn't performing, and then other people got onto the bandwagon, well, I'm going to do as much as him, then the workload for the sales management team went up. So the 50-50 commission, I found, kept people self-motivated. So it'd be interesting to hear Tom's contrary opinion to it.
Yeah, I think there's different levels, right? So depends. I'm not saying if you bring someone new into the business and they're an SDR and they're a grad and they got 1 year experience that you're just going to pay them 120k or something like that. But I think, you know, if you've got an experienced guy who's been with you and is an account exec for a couple of years, and you can look at alternative stuff to get the best out of them. You know, so yeah, it's a different point of view. Some like, I think carrot and stick works well to a certain extent in certain environments. It depends, right? If it's a transactional sale, this is why it's so difficult, right? Because if you're selling something that's $25, carrot and stick works brilliant. If you're selling that's something long term and it's $20,000, then carrot and stick doesn't work because it's too long. Everything's too drawn out. It's too complex. So I think, you know, it depends what you're selling and at what price. So that there's variance there. Yeah. So like, yeah, I wouldn't. I'm talking about RewardGateway, which is enterprise and probably quite a medium-sized contract value in this case. But yeah, if it's transactional, then it'd be different. Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily look at it in that case.
So I'm going to chime in on that. What we do is that I run a few salespeople, and we'll do like a 50-50 split. People that come on will do a straight commission, such like that, at a base. But we chase a lot of, like, so someone that's been with us for at least a year or something like that, and is going after larger deals, their commission structure is paid out over the length of the contract. So some of these contracts, we had a salesperson close out, they're going to make $50K a year for each year for 3 years. So there's stuff like that, but that deal took them 4 years to close. So something like that, we don't want to do the carrot and stick. So I'm just kind of supporting what you said in that. You're completely right. Where it works in different situations, in some situations it doesn't. So
Yeah, it depends on the value and when you're selling. But yeah, so you pay them out over a long period of time. Do you get paid monthly or paid annually, like from the client?
on something like that, it's quarterly.
Okay. Yeah. So we used to get paid. We used to get paid annually up front for the year for like the software from HR. So we'd just pay the commission on the first year of the contract. So it was still very good for the company. You sell a $100,000 deal on a 4 or 5 year contract. And these client stays, they pay $500K. You pay 10, 15%, 20% to the salesperson, but only on the first year, right?
Yeah.
So it depends on what your churn rate is and everything. Like we had like 96, 97% retention. It was very high. That's why the book grew very quickly. That's why it was attractive to investors. So the retention rate was high.
Yeah, no, I have some stuff, like we have large scale stuff like that. We also have stuff that's smaller scale for us is something, $5,000 to $10,000. So something like that, that person still needs to be benefited, and we kind of do a similar structure. You mentioned that person needs to make similar amounts of money as someone going to sell enterprise. It can't just be, well, I want to do enterprise, or I don't want to do anything for you. Because then all I'm going to have is enterprise guys working for me. So.
Yeah, so that's going back to that point we said earlier. It was like,
Exactly.
how can you not make them migrate? If they're really good at SMB, you want to keep them there, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Please.
I'm curious if a salary could be considered a form of a cap, rather than commission. I mean, I own my own small business, so in some ways, especially in early days, commission's attractive because it's variable, so it's like having a lower fixed cost. But over time, it can become, it's tricky because then you're paying an enormous amount when it grows, and you prefer to switch to a fixed rather than a variable expense. So I'm just curious about, but I also understand that, you don't want to put on caps. So I'm just curious how the perception is of a salary versus commission in terms of a perceived cap.
And it's It's a really fascinating question because a lot of, particularly in startups, founders are thinking about cash on hand. You look at some of the reps that come on board in the non-cap situation. You know, usually it can be a couple of reps that do really, really well. Did that ever happen in RewardGateway?
Yeah, I think yeah, we had people that did really well. I think going back to your cap thing, we never worried about that because they're selling, right? So it doesn't matter because if they're selling, you're making loads of money. So it's kind of really like, it's a bit of a mute point. It's like, so I'm worried if they sell more. Do you see what I mean? It's like,
Well,
okay.
I'm wondering
yeah.
if you go to a non-commission pay scale, though, is
Yeah.
that considered a cap? In other words, if I sell more, I don't make more now.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
That's easier to do when you've got like an established business and you probably know your sales cycle, you know your run rate, you know your average deal value, all the important key metrics. I think that's it. You know, that's obviously a big decision. People, you know, and also like you're exploring roles when you start up a company, right? Because you don't know whether that role is going to be right. So one of the things that I've definitely learned is to test something, you know, and bring the person in to then execute on what you want to do and help that they organically kind of grow in the business as well is an important thing. I think when you're hiring in these growth stages, I think the biggest mistake actually going to the VP of sales thing is if you're looking for a VP of sales, don't hire a VP of sales in the start. Yeah, hire the person who's director of sales somewhere else who's aspiring to be the next VP of sales. Because you put a VP of sales in, they don't want to be a VP of sales, they want to be a CEO. Yeah? So you're screwed from day one. Yeah? So actually what you want to do is put in that, like, my wife's just actually hired someone at RewardGateway, very talented. He was a marketing director somewhere else, and they just hired him as the VP of marketing. So you found someone on the way up. Yeah? So my one bit of advice would be don't necessarily look for the person with the main experience who's nailed it already and whatever, because you know, you want someone who's on that transition probably.
It's almost like you're building some buffer for advancement.
Yeah.
As your team grows. You know, I see it often in startups where you may bring in a director of sales initially as your first kind of management role.
Yeah.
If that person grows into it, they could be VP, but also gives you room as a CEO to bring in maybe someone on top, depending on what the skills are and the ability to execute.
Yeah, it gives you options. Yeah.
So to figure out potentially a good salesperson, you want metrics, right? So how do you figure out what a good quota or a good metric is, and then how often do you reevaluate it? How often do you evaluate the salesperson?
That one question on 5.
7.
No, I think the one thing that we always did was hire in 2s or 3s, because then you don't know if it's a fluke or not. Yeah, so you're actually measuring people against each other. So there could be people that just aren't right. So there's a culture fit that has to be right for the business, and there's a skill fit. There's a certain skill fit that happens that you need in a startup, depending on what type of company you are and what you're selling. But there's some basics, right, that you're looking to measure, I guess, in terms of performance. It's interesting. I think there's a whole new wave, really, you know, where you're not thinking necessarily about measuring the end result. Everything's about measuring the end result in CRM world, revenue, output. If you're a real good sales leader, you need to understand, right, how good is this person at a discovery call? How good is this person at a web demo? How well does this person negotiate? How well do they close? They're the things I'm more interested in when I'm working with a team. And it's easier in the start, right, because you sit in a room and there's 5 of you and you're all together every day. So that's the best time to do it. Yeah, you can go out on sales calls together. You can give them a lot more time. So it's easier when you're sub 5. That's the easier. Nothing's easy, but that's the easier part, right? When you're smaller, because you're all together and you can control things more. But yeah, there'll be some of the things I'm looking for, like actual soft skills rather than like metrics that you learn later.
So as opposed to just looking purely at revenue, you want to see how did it actually perform as a salesperson, looking at their skills.
Yeah.
But just out of curiosity, what were maybe some things that you looked for with new hires?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to go on to that in a second, but I think we looked for, I was just talking about this earlier, but we definitely look for, like, what I'd say are, like, athletes. So people who have more, like, the will and the desire rather than, you know, oh, I've worked here selling this before, doing this in a certain way, because they have a certain type of mentality and a way of working, and also people are more malleable if they haven't done something before. People come in a startup with, oh, I did it this way here and I did it that way there. I can hear our old VP of Services telling us how he did everything in his last company, you know. So it's just that's what not people want to hear. You know, they don't want to hear how it was done somewhere else. They want to hear how it happens here. You know, salespeople want to learn from the best people in their own business, not how something was done somewhere else. Right? Because everyone's business is unique. Cool. So moving on to some of the things I thought really pushed us on and kind of pushed us forward. So we didn't go after enterprise from day one, and that was quite tactical in terms of our approach. We sold to many enterprise clients over the years, and even when we launched in the US, we worked with people like Comcast and Yahoo and AOL and stuff like that. But it just takes a really long time. Yeah, they can be really slow, and they want to usually change everything with your product, right? So the feedback that you're getting is massive, right? If you're a startup and you're wanting to learn super quick, then the best people you learn from are the smaller organizations. And they don't have to be tiny SMB, but even like mid-market. So I started in the August of 2008, and by September, October, we were closing 20k deals with companies that had like 800, 700, 600 employees, and we were refining our message. You know, we didn't know what our, what our like USPs were exactly, what our messaging was, what our go-to-market strategy was, or anything like that. So you're kind of trying to define all these things, and you just got to create a world where you can learn as quickly as possible. So that was a key thing. But within like 10 or 12 months, we then started going after enterprise clients very successfully. You know, IBM, McDonald's, American Express. It just had to be the right time for us. And I think also, it becomes a hotbed for all your competitors. Everyone gravitates to enterprise because it's the easier win. I see it all the time now. I speak to CEO and founders, and it's like, oh, well, we can't sell to people under 100 employees. I'm like, okay, well, it's because it's hard. Yeah, it's just got to find a way to do it. But it's not saying that enterprise is easy. It's just easier to go, oh, well, we did 4 deals this year and they're all over 100k, and that's fine. It just depends what your strategy is. There's not many companies I've met out there that their whole client base is made up of the Fortune 500. There might be a few. So you're probably going to sell to SMB or medium-sized companies at some point, so you might as well start there to learn, especially in like SaaS and tech. So that was one thing we did that I think helps us grow really quick and learn really fast. Another thing that was really important to us, so understanding what we were selling. I mentioned HR software earlier, but not to bore you with it, but it was basically in the employee benefits market in the UK. So it's a very different space to here because obviously there's no private healthcare. So it's a different kind of space, but predominantly all the players that were there before we came along were led out of insurance companies or banks. So you can imagine all these sales guys going in with, pinstripe suits and a certain kind of way about the company. They're marketed in a certain way, they looked a certain way. And we didn't want anything to do with that. So we didn't hire anyone from the industry or anyone from our competition. We talked a little bit about the type of people we tried to hire, hired earlier. So we went for people who fitted into our culture. We had a more vibrant feel. We made HR feel special. It was just a very different approach. But one of the things that we did was create like a spirit of an underdog, I suppose is the right way to kind of coin it. We were the upstarters, we were disrupting. People would tell my CEO that you're going to be busting a month, you can't charge for these things, you're not going to make any money, usual scaremongering tactics. Kind of go on from other companies and competitors and stuff like that. But for us, it was really making sure that we had the right people who were going to help in that phase. And sometimes when you look at these people that you have in the business, and I can look back over 8 years, being honest and open with people. Some people will be there for the first 2 years, and that's quite cool, and they'll move on and do their own thing. Some people will be there for the first 5 or the first 4, and that's fine. I think it's just having that culture where people can see that. Everyone wants to come in and what's my next role and what's my next job, and sometimes it's not about that. It's about the now. do that job really well for 2 years, and then it might be time for you to move on, or it might be time for you to, step up. I think what we did was we brought the right people in who could grow organically within the business, which gave us a strong backbone for the first 5 years, really.
How did you maintain engagement for sales reps that were always kind of looking to grow out of that BDR role quickly, especially with like the younger millennials, and kind of how they were always looking for that next role?
Yeah, so what was that kind of that advancement stages that you set for the team, people who are earlier on in their careers, BDRs and so on, and how they advance up the organization?
Yeah, so I think there was different ways that we kind of did it. So first of all, we would usually start people selling to a certain type of sector or a certain type of size, but that was beneficial to the business as well, so people could learn. I really believe passionately that salespeople don't want to take quizzes or tests. Yeah, they want to learn by doing and learning from the top performers in your own organisation. So I think the way that you decide to ramp up that learning curve is kind of critical. Then we were lucky. We expanded into other countries. We had guys who moved to Australia and sold over there. We had guys who eventually moved to the US. If you look at my wife's team now, the head of corporate sales is a guy I hired. The SMB manager is a guy who's been there for 5 years. He started in sales. So we've grown a lot of people organically through the business. So there will be, as long as you're growing and successful, there's those opportunities. The personal development thing is a challenge, because everyone wants that kind of next step. But I think the most important thing is we created an environment where people felt like they were progressing all the time. So we did team training and coaching on a Monday and a Friday. We didn't have much resource or much budget, but we made sure that happened all the time. So people didn't feel like they necessarily knew all the answers. No one ever does, but I think in terms of people feeling like they're getting something back from the company, as well as just giving, the whole thing that, when you're managing people or anything like that, it's a give-get thing, right? So you can't just take. So if they feel like they're getting something back, then you're going to keep them happier for longer. But again, it goes back to that thing. Yeah, they might be a great sales rep for you for 18 months, depending on your thing, and you've got to be cool with that, right? And they might be a great rep for 3 years and then become your new sales leader. It's just being cool with whatever unfolds at the right time. Probably a long answer, but no.
Did your hiring profile change as you guys became more established in the market, or did you kind of stick to hiring of your industry competitors?
Probably learned quite a bit, from the time you just started, till the time that kind of right before you left the organization. You probably learned quite a bit about that ideal hiring profile. So did anything kind of change or really stick out in your mind?
Yeah, well, we paid less than everyone else in the market, so that was a real challenge to start. So if you're talking in sterling, when I was hiring our first salespeople, we were paying a base of 18 to 22k 8 years ago, which would be $30,000 or late 20s or something like that, which isn't much in London, where it's really expensive to live. So we were right back where our office was in Notting Hill. So we had a challenge, the pool of candidates that I could even entertain getting into the business was really difficult. So there was kind of that phase where people, we had to hire, we had kind of your hands forced, right? We had to hire really young, hungry people who'd maybe done one sales job before for a year and give them a vast amount of energy and a vast amount of time to really get them up to speed. But yeah, as the business evolved, definitely in the last kind of 2 or 3 years, as kind of I left and phased out, the base salary is more than doubled. There's the product's developed as well, so that has a lot to do with it. So when we started, we were very good, selling one product. Yeah, it's very easy to sell one product. When you start selling multiple products on a platform, it gets a bit more complicated. There's more to do, more to remember, different things like that. So I definitely feel we probably, I say we, I'm not there anymore, we migrated to more of a consultant approach slightly, but still not losing any of the kind of culture fit there at the same time. So yeah, I guess it's in more of a natural way that it unfolded really, as we could spend more on salaries. The company had zero investment, like our CEO had 2 credit cards, and there was 2 other co-founders that put in a little bit of money, and then I came in, and literally, you know, and the mentality was very, the English term of penny pinching, right? But it wasn't like that. It was just very careful, yeah. So, you know, I remember going to do some pitches up in Edinburgh once, and my EA booked me in a hotel, and I went into the hotel, and I was like, got in my room, and I was like, where's the bathroom? And it was like communal, and I was like, oh my god. So like, even to the point that they would make sure they get the cheapest hotel. This is before things like Hotwire existed, right? So it was, you know, we were very careful with money in the early days. It was all about getting to that first kind of profit number, and then seeing where we go from there. But sorry, I'm getting a long-winded answer now, but we had a different, we wouldn't cut money on certain things, so on people and culture. So we'd throw good parties, and we'd have like a business update where everyone would get together. We'd spend money in the right places, not necessarily waste money in other places. But yeah, that definitely changed over time. I think it's just a natural thing that probably happened.
And you get kind of like choosier, or there were certain things that you sort of look for specifically, you know, people's profiles?
Yeah, I think, I know people have a kind of particular view maybe on like personality profiling and stuff like that. So we actually used one very successfully that we integrated into the whole business, and it's called Insights. It codes it very well. You know, I'm a very visual person, like most salespeople are, but it kind of color codes it in a wagon wheel, and it's very accurate as long as you answer it honestly. As long as you've got the people answering it honestly, but that's easier when you've got people in the business. You create like a trust, but the personality profiling, we would talk about people in colours across the whole business. Like, so red meant direct, yellow meant bubbly, blue meant that you were like generally kind of detailed, green meant you were caring on various different levels. So we would like literally talk about a prospect how she's red, like that. It was that ingrained in the business. But things like that definitely helped us to understand who's going to work well. So one of the things you'd introduce if you had a manager was you'd get them now to read, if I was speaking, I'd get them to read my profile, to understand that, you know, you have to get straight to the point with me, otherwise you're going to lose my attention. Yeah, so I can't focus around them like that. If any of you talk to me today on like, you know, 5 minutes, it's just the way I am, right? So everyone has a different way of working, but those profiles really helped us. And that was a good tool.
Thank you.
Kind of like DISC or something like that?
Yeah, very similar. Yeah, it just makes it, just codifies it in a bit of an easier way to understand.
And that was called Insights, right?
Yeah, Insights, yeah. I think you pay like, once you get embedded with them and you train someone internally in the business, it's like, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 bucks a test, and you can just get someone to do it online.
We have a question here, but should we take it? I don't know. A little suspicious. All right.
So Tom, can you describe how your interview process and your hiring process kind of evolved and the steps within it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what we sometimes even now people think it's a little bit of unconventional, even at like a senior level. So we got people to come in and make them feel comfortable first. So we had, like, eventually when we got bigger, we did kind of the recruitment days and different things like that. But ultimately, we would want someone to come in and get to know us, see the office, you know, the company, understand like that side of it first. Because people aren't themselves until they relax as a starting point. So there's no point grilling someone in the first kind of stage. You've got to have multiple stages, and then there's a time that's probably right to really kind of push those buttons. But what we wanted to do from a sales perspective was really understand if someone can sell. Yeah, so a big part of the job in the UK was actually presenting. Yeah, so, you know, if you got through a tender or an RFP, there's a certain amount of a beauty parade you'd have to go through, so that's an important part of that skill set in that role in that country. So we want to know that someone can do it. So, you know, as part of one of those steps, we would get people to present. Yeah, so we'd like give them access to the product for maybe a week before, and then we'd get them to come in and present it to us. You know, actually see that they can do it. You know, that was a really important part. It wasn't all just like questions and answers and digging that way. It was actually, can you practically do it as well?
Mike.
Question on social selling skills. I saw some research recently that said somebody who's really sophisticated and really good in terms of using social media to sell and I'm not talking about Facebook or LinkedIn or other platforms, are 6 times more likely to hit quota. The opposite side of that is that they're highly unlikely to pick up the phone and talk to customers. So how do you feel about, on one level, social selling skills, and how do you feel on the other level about personalization and the inability to pick up the phone and really take people on a personal?
No, a lot of stuff there just around social selling, but do you have like a philosophy on social selling, and did you really employ that at RewardGateway?
Yeah, obviously social selling's come in is a bit newer towards the end of my time. I think, you know, social selling is something that's still evolving. Not everyone necessarily understands it. I think depending on your outbound or your inbound process and how you actually sell is quite dependent. I think, you know, it's very different, right? If you're selling to salespeople, it's very easy to social sell. If you're selling to HR, you know, I'm selling to my mum a lot of the times, and, you know, she's not on there. She's not on LinkedIn every day. Yeah, she doesn't go on it. Yeah, she might have a profile, but she's not active. So it depends, you know, it does depend who you're selling to and the type of sales process. I think, you know, there's something that I've learned since we've been in the US, there's a way, I think, through, and I wouldn't say I've coined it or understand it or anything, but you shouldn't really have to sell cold now. There's enough ways of understanding and connecting with people that by the time you get to have that conversation, they should feel like they know you. Yeah? So, you know, you connect with someone, you share some content, you endorse them, you know, you chat, you know, it's just more of a patient play. Yeah, I think it says what I'm starting to understand from like social selling, definitely. So really, you know, you should only be selling to your first contacts. You know, is kind of the way I look at it. But I think going back to your last point, which is, you know, do you miss that personable skill? I think you could teach someone how to social sell, but you might not teach someone how to hunt, right? So I know people like hustle gets overused to a massive extent these days, but you know, you just gotta have that attitude that you don't care, right? So people have never turned around to me and said, in all the time I've been selling, oh, you tried to contact me too much, go away. Yeah, it just doesn't happen. So like I arranged to go on a podcast the other week, and the guy who runs the podcast said, and you know, you got to me because you'd sent me 6 emails in my inbox and 2 messages on LinkedIn. Right, you just got to get noticed. So my answer is, I guess, is you want a healthy balance of the two, but you could probably teach someone how to social sell, where you can't teach people to be proactive and hunt. That's through nurturing the way they are.
Yeah, and it's definitely a good point. And there's some core abilities there that are just more innate that you just really can't teach as a skill. Actually, in particular to social selling, our Seattle group on Thursday will be live streaming an event with someone really great, Matt Hines of Hines Marketing. We're actually going to be talking about social selling as it relates to pipeline generation. So we're actually going to be talking about like what that really means realistically in terms of generating real revenue opportunities. Because I think there's a big gap here around social selling, which is there's a lot of stuff. Does it actually equate to something? We're kind of wrapping up towards the end of our evening. Want to go through the last couple of points?
Yeah, so just to finish on something that I think was not just really important, but very special to me in the way that like the company operated. We created a culture where sales was the #1 priority for the whole company, right? I felt that if I went to product, they would listen and drop stuff for me. If it was client services or support, they would do anything I needed, right? Because they understood that sales was the most important thing, right, to the company, because that was how we grew. But there was a way that we did this, right? You can't just put it in your company values and say sales is important. It doesn't work like that. One thing that we really took time over was being very transparent with our numbers and what we did. So every Tuesday, everyone would know exactly where we are. You know, across the whole business, they would feel the pain of sales. Yeah, so you would make sure that it was a very visible thing. We did something called a quarterly business update, which then became a global business update as we became a bigger business. And we would spend a half-day off-site together, sharing learnings and experiences from the whole of the last quarter. So you could look at it, oh well, it takes a day to plan someone's time, half a day off every quarter, or a full day really, because no one does work in the other half of the day. But they were people came back so buzzed up and inspired after those like quarterly, like GBUs we call them. They were just so important to our culture, the way we did things. But as I mentioned earlier, 5% of the equity was given to the employees, yeah? And we even paid for that share when it came to the exit point. So the minimal amount that they had to pay for the share, everyone got there. So we had a lady who was from Colombia who was a cleaner in the office, and she even made a lot of money and went home, you know. So it's about everyone feeling like they own it, yeah? And if you can create that culture, then people will understand. Hard thing is, no one ever understands each other's job, right? And no one ever understands how hard it is. They always think they've got the hardest job or whatever. But you know, sales was the heartbeat of the business. It had to be to get where we needed to be, and you know, making sure that it was, you know, the most important thing at that point in the company's growth was something that worked really well for us.
I think a very good point. Now, look at sales. It really is a team sport. You really need to get the entire company behind you, particularly as you start to work on a lot of complex deals. Anyone have any last thoughts or question? Please.
It was just kind of a follow-up question on this, but like, at what point do you tell your people to like stop selling people, like you're annoying them? Like you said, you don't get, you never got somebody that said that they were annoyed at you for like trying to sell whatever, but at what point do you kind of like pull the trigger or stop?
What is the limit on trying to reach people? Is it a restraining order?
Yeah, there's lots of different studies out there, but there's one actually from Microsoft which talks about touch points. So no one actually, like no one actually sees you to the 7th touch point because of email, however you're doing it. You're just not in their mind. You're not even there. So you've got to get past the 7 touch points very quickly. So it'd be like you talk to a sales guy and like, oh, I emailed them when you emailed them last week. When did you call them? Friday. It's not enough, right? So totally depends on your business, totally depends who you're selling to and your process. But we would have like a 14-day in our outbound cycle, and the touch points would be high, 2 to 3 points per day, till we got like some sort of answer. But obviously it's a tailored message in a consultative way, you know, and stuff like that. So it just depends really. I think you know, you've got to put a cap on it after a point in time, and that depends on your process. But when we had a process like that, we'd probably get, you know, 70% of people giving us some sort of answer, yes, no, speak to this person by the end of it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. It's just, it's hard to judge.
I guess, yeah, okay.
Just one quick question.
Sure.
So what was the culture difference from the UK to the US when you came over here and tried selling?
Oh, interesting question. What was there cultural differences between the different regions?
Yeah, definitely. I think people in the US are a lot more upfront and honest. Like in it, they're a lot more direct. So in the UK, they won't be straight up with you. Yeah, they won't tell, like, not all the time, but they won't be as direct. They'll pull you along for a little bit longer. Whereas here, if someone doesn't like what they see on a web demo or something, they'll tell you very quickly, which is a good thing, right? But no, I think the UK is a smaller country. There's a big train network, so there's a certain expectation to go face to face. So inside sales doesn't really exist like it does here. So that changes the whole dynamic. Anyway, there's not, inside sales isn't big there. Yes, you have reps who develop opportunities and meetings and stuff, but it's not like, you don't see people selling over the phone like the whole way through.
What about Australia? Which is also like a fairly small country. I mean, it's such a smaller population.
Well, Australia is very different because it's so far away and cut off from the rest of the world. It's like going back in time a little bit when you go to Australia. It's how can I put it? There's like a lot of it is done through relationship, face to face, even more than the UK. You know, just their expectation. They're a lot slower as well. There's quite a laid-back culture. I guess you would notice a difference in someone who lives on the west coast to the east coast or something like that. You know, someone lives in New York, their intensity to someone who would be from San Francisco. So Australia, you know, they go there. For, you know, people are brought up on the lifestyle. You know, they take their surfboard out and go after work. So like the CBD down in town, in Australia is like ghost town, 5 o'clock. No one's there, right? Because it's, you know, they go home and they do their stuff. So it's just a different pace. You know, so their summer is December, and you know you're not going to do a deal then. Yeah, it's not going to happen.
I want to ask just one final question. You'll stick around for a little bit?
Yeah, of course.
We'll have questions one-on-one. I always ask, just curiosity, is there any sort of book, because we were talking about books before and people not necessarily reading a whole lot. So is there kind of a book that you find inspiring or you think would be super, super valuable for folks to read, whether it's from a sales context, motivation context, or just even just a general business leadership context?
I'm the worst at like reading the first 2 chapters and then stopping. I listen to a lot of podcasts, if I'm honest, and I take in a lot of information that way because I can take in that information while I'm doing things. So I'll be a liar if I said that I read a load of books. Seth Godin said something really interesting where he says I read the book till I get the joke and then I stop reading it. So I like to think of myself as that kind of thing, but no, I think from a sales perspective, I actually found Simon Sinek's Why really helpful. I think the way that you consult in sales and the questions that you ask has changed a lot. You know, you can't just dive in and product push like you might have done a decade ago. So, you know, how you really pull out information from a prospect is a very different tactical approach. So something simple like that doesn't necessarily have to be a kind of sales philosophy or anything like that, because I don't think one size fits all. I think you might take, you know, a little bit from every type of sales thing and put it, you know, in a different spin in your own business.
And a particular podcast? You mentioned podcasts.
As I'm starting up a new business, I do listen to SaaStr a lot, which is a good like tech podcast, but that has a lot of sales stuff on it. They interview a lot of sales guys. So yeah, definitely if you're interested in hearing from senior salespeople and stuff like that, I'd probably say SaaStr is the one I listen to the most.
Some comment?
I did have a question.
Oh yeah, sure.
As we talked about different cultures, any differences you've observed between women and men, the way they do sales and the way you would coach them to be better?
You're trying to push me into a corner on this one.
Women versus men in sales.
I've mentioned my wife a few times, and obviously we worked together for a long period of time. I generally think women are better people managers. Yeah, if I'm honest, in that situation. So we've got a great sales director in the UK, and that's just I can only go off my own experience. In terms of getting the best out of people and the best out of teams. But you know, I don't think there is any real difference. You see kind of key characteristics as you would in kind of any salespeople, but no, I don't think there's any real main thing I would say that would make you different to anyone else.
Yeah, I think, and that's something I think it's worthwhile exploring for a future talk. We did actually have a diversity talk in New York City earlier in the year, and it might be worthwhile kind of exploring that a little bit deeper. But I just want to give a round of applause for Tom coming in.